It's a fascinating question. What happens when a fiercely progressive millennial disruptor collides head-on with a 60-year-old post-colonial institution? Well, it completely upends the traditional political playbook. And for the story we're looking at today, it all starts with one, honestly, pretty audacious statement. Homer, step aside. A woman wants to take over.
Welcome to This Explainer! Today, we're breaking down the unprecedented and highly debated rise of Nekeisha Burchell. She's a parliamentarian from the Jamaican People's National Party who is actively redefining Caribbean leadership. We're going to look at the data, the strategy, and of course, the controversies that make her one of the most fascinating case studies in modern politics.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. We'll be looking at a new political paradigm, the calculated ascent, her trial by Hurricane Melissa, rejecting the gray suit, the patois parliamentary clash, and finally, we'll wrap up with the cost of disruption. Part 1. A new political paradigm. Now, to truly understand the disruptor, we first have to understand the battleground itself. So, let's head over to St. James Southern. This is a rural, mountainous constituency in Jamaica, and it's characterized by some really deep economic contrasts and systemic underinvestment. The vote percentages here shifted dramatically back and forth between 2011 and 2025, which basically maps out a highly volatile electorate. The People's National Party, or PNP, held the seat in 2011 and then just barely hung on in 2016. After that, the Jamaica Labour Party's Homer Davis captured it with a very decisive 57.8% of the vote in 2020. But then, come 2025, we see a massive reversal. Imagine living in an area with a chronic lack of basic infrastructure. We're talking about not even having properly piped water. It basically creates the perfect structural conditions for a radical challenger to step in and just completely shake things up.
Which brings us to Part 2, the calculated ascent. That radical challenger I just mentioned, she arrived in the September 2025 general elections, bringing a highly calculated strategy to unseat the incumbents.
Nekeisha Burchell presented the electorate with this incredibly potent dual identity. On one hand, she's the proud Garland's girl. She leaned heavily into her rural, working-class farming origins to build this unassailable grassroots authenticity. But on the other hand, she is a highly educated architect of image. She graduated from both the University of the West Indies and the globally renowned London School of Economics, armed with a master's degree in strategic communications. She managed to merge that immediate on-the-ground community connection with a really sophisticated international public relations acumen.
And she used that strategic background to aggressively deconstruct her opponent, Homer Davis. Now, Davis was a traditional law and order politician and a former police officer. So Burchell actually weaponized that record. Referencing the local police emergency number 119, she told crowds there is another 119, a man who used to wear the JCF badge, but that is not the good 119. The strategy here framed the election as a stark choice between historical state oppression and modern community empowerment. And well, it worked. She won the seat.
Part 3. Trial by Hurricane Melissa. Because just weeks after her historic victory in September 2025, political theory violently collided with catastrophic reality.
In October 2025, Hurricane Melissa made a devastating direct landfall in western Jamaica. We are talking about maximum sustained winds of 190 miles per hour. The monetary losses approached a staggering $8.8 billion US. To put that into perspective, that officially made it the costliest natural disaster in Jamaican history.
For Burchell, this was an absolute crucible moment. The fragile infrastructure of her rural constituency totally collapsed, completely severing communities from the national grid. So, she instantly transitioned into this hands-on crisis manager, launching what she called Project Pickney Power. She bypassed standard bureaucratic bottlenecks by mobilizing helicopters to airlift food and potable water directly into isolated communities like Cambridge. She even coordinated complex medical evacuations during a really deadly secondary leptospirosis outbreak. This intense, highly visible response firmly cemented her reputation. She proved herself as a fiercely defensive advocate for her people.
Part 4. Rejecting the gray suit. Having proven herself on the ground, Burchell then shifted gears, moving from fixing physical infrastructure to dismantling ideological norms within the halls of power.
Now, what's really interesting about this strategy is how she tackled intense patriarchal expectations within Jamaican politics. Traditionally, female politicians have been expected to adopt conservative gray suits, minimize their femininity, and mimic flat or British-influenced tones just to be taken seriously. Well, Burchell completely rejected this. Despite intense pressure to, tone it down, she fully embraced form-fitting clothing and a natural colloquial cadence. Think about the professional expectations in your own industry and imagine just completely inverting them. She argued this was a deliberate strategy to mirror the aesthetics of working-class female entrepreneurs, basically signaling to the everyday women selling goods in the informal economy that they too belong in the formal halls of power.
Part 5. The Patois Parliamentary Clash. This ideological disruption eventually escalated to its absolute peak on May 12, 2026, creating her highest-profile structural confrontation yet. Picture this. She's standing in the Jamaican House of Representatives to deliver her maiden sectoral speech, but instead of following the strict English-only standing orders, Burchell begins speaking in the Jamaican language, patois. She starts off, "Madam Speaker, me get up this afternoon for make my first sectoral speech, pa my portfolio." She was almost immediately interrupted by the Speaker of the House, Juliet Holness, who strictly enforced the rules, warning Burchell to switch to standard English or lose her speaking time. Burchell did comply, but that brief interruption, it sparked absolute chaos in the chamber. The incident instantly polarized the nation, but some hard sociological data provides crucial context here. A 2005 language attitude survey reveals that a massive 79.5% of the populace actually recognizes Jamaican or patois as a distinct language. This is exactly why prominent academics like literary scholar Professor Carolyn Cooper rallied so forcefully to Burchell's defense. They argued against the deep-seated colonial bias that dismisses the native tongue of the majority as mere broken English.
And Dr. Sanja Stanley Naya took the critique even further, calling the English-only parliamentary rule a direct legacy of enslavement. She highlighted the severe cognitive dissonance of a modern Caribbean parliament aggressively suppressing the native tongue birthed from the struggle for survival, all while surrounded by colonial pageantry like ceremonial maces and robes. Now, on the flip side, conservative elements in the government countered this by arguing strongly for procedural adherence. Their point was that institutional rules must be changed thoughtfully through formal consultation, not through arbitrary disruption. Both sides essentially drew a hard line in the sand.
Which leads us to Part 6, the cost of disruption. Because pushing against those institutional lines comes with a steep price, bringing us to the severe political vulnerability of continuous disruption. Let's move to and see how this builds, because it reveals a sheer whiplash velocity. We go from an election victory in September 2025 to a catastrophic hurricane in October, right to the patois speech in early May 2026. Then, just weeks later in late May, we hit the fixed podcast row. It was here where her colloquial, informal style finally backfired. In the age of informal digital media, that colloquial style can definitely be a double-edged sword. While discussing Speaker Juliet Holness's strict enforcement of the parliamentary rules during the patois clash, Burchell used a highly controversial gendered analogy. She stated, "That kind of control that perhaps you can get away with in a marriage if you want to control your husband." This was a direct, flippant reference to the speaker's marriage to Jamaica's Prime Minister Andrew Holness. As you might expect, the institutional backlash was swift and fierce. Generation 2000, the young professional affiliate of the rival party, slammed the comments as sexist and unfortunate. Prominent female parliamentarians weighed in too, with Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith calling it retrogressive and MP Fayval Williams denouncing it as inappropriate and downright low. The core critique here was highly damaging to Burchell's brand. Critics argued that the self-proclaimed champion of anti-patriarchy had just weaponized the exact same outdated patriarchal stereotypes, reducing a decisive female leader to a controlling wife against a fellow female politician. Which leaves us with an absolutely critical question. Can a disruptor survive the friction of the very institutions they are trying to dismantle? Nekeisha Burchell has proven she possesses unparalleled cultural resonance and the academic depth to expose systemic flaws. But will she be able to successfully synthesize her fiercely authentic grassroots identity with the disciplined statecraft required at the highest levels of governance? Or will her continuous disruption ultimately isolate her? It's a real political tightrope act. So what do you think? Can true disruption ever survive the institutions it tries to change, or must it eventually conform? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.